Hey, blessings and welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we are in Ezekiel chapter 29, and we've got 4 verses. Then we go to Daniel chapter 4. There was a read out of Jeremiah chapter 52 that was 3 verses long, that was parallel to the 2 Kings chapter 25 verses 27 through 30. Those were the same. And then we jump over into Psalm 44. And there was just one really great takeaway. There's a lot of takeaways, but there's one great verse that we're going to end on that comes out of Daniel that just kind of sums everything up. It's a really neat verse. But we're going to start today looking at Ezekiel chapter 29, and verses 17 through 21 are an extension of the prophecy we spoke of, I think, a week ago, about the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, and they came against Tyre. And Tyre, the prophecy of how they were going to wipe every stone off of that site into the ocean. And that happened not with King Nebuchadnezzar, but later on with Alexander when he came. But the prophecy is extended here, and it talks about the soldiers and their bald heads and their shoulders are rubbed bare. And that's from them wearing their helmets constantly. And if you think about it, it wasn't like wearing a hat. I mean, this was a metal helmet with a piece of leather in it, and it would rub around and it would catch, and I mean, it would rub their heads raw. So it's just a real interesting piece of the prophecy that was included in today's read. And then we jump down into Daniel chapter 4. And this is where I'm going to spend our time, because Jeremiah and 2 Kings deals with they're a similar verse, but they just deal with one little part. Psalm 44, I love the fact that it talks about the light of God's presence and what that means to us in our lives, because God is light, and without Him we have no light. But Daniel chapter 4 is talking again about King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. It didn't come to a prophet, it came to Nebuchadnezzar, kind of like when the king of Egypt or the Pharaoh of Egypt had a dream, and Joseph came in and interpreted it. And it was about the 7 years of famine. And then Daniel, we learn early on, he goes in and he interprets a dream, which basically he saves all of the magicians and the wise men, because Daniel is able to interpret that dream. Well, here again in verse 8, after everyone has failed to interpret this dream, Daniel, this very much an older gentleman at this time, kind of walks in, and Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, here's the guy who has the spirit of the gods with him, little g gods. He doesn't understand the God, the maker, the creator, but he understands that Daniel has a gift of the spirit from gods. He recognizes that this is a supernatural gift. He just doesn't know who to attribute or who to give credit to, but he's going to find out. So he tells Daniel his dream, and it's almost like, man, as soon as he starts speaking it, the interpretation for Daniel comes immediately, because Daniel, his face, and he's kind of almost upset. He's appalled at what he hears in this dream. And King Nebuchadnezzar is like, what is it? And Daniel, he says, I wish it hadn't been you. I wish this was on your enemies, but this is about you, King Nebuchadnezzar. And he talks about these 7 periods of time. We don't know if they're 7 years or 7 months or 7 weeks or 7 days. I tend to believe there's 7 months, and I'll explain that. But basically, for 7 months, King Nebuchadnezzar is going to go out. He's going to lose his mind. He's going to eat grass like a cow. He's going to sleep out in the fields. He's going to get dew on him at night because he's not in a bed. He's just sleeping on the ground. And this period of 7 times, once he comes out of it, he comes back and he regains his kingdom. I don't know that if it had been a 7-year period that there wouldn't have been somebody move in and try and take over as king. It's possible. I also think, and I don't really have anything to back this up with, but I think that Daniel, he probably left Daniel in charge of his kingdom. He trusted Daniel. He knew Daniel. He knew Daniel's leadership abilities. He knew Daniel was a man of integrity. And for those reasons, I think, just my opinion, I bet he left Daniel in charge of his kingdom while he went out for what I think is 7 months. It said during this time his hair grew long and his fingernails grew out like I think they said like a bird. But anyway, his fingernails grew. Um, it just says his nails grew long. And all that could have occurred in 7 months. So regardless of what the time period is, the big thing for me, thing I loved most about this read was how Nebuchadnezzar reacts to this when he comes back to his senses. He comes back, gets all cleaned up, and he just jumps right back into his kingdom and picks up right where he left off. In chapter 4, verse 37 of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, the greatest ruler of all time at that time, the ruler of the known world, says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are true and his ways just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride." So Nebuchadnezzar basically admits he was a very prideful, arrogant man, and God humbled him. And now he understands. He doesn't talk about God's plural. He talks about the God of heaven. And this is the God that Daniel has told him about. So he exalts God in heaven. And I love how this daily read ends, because a lot of times we can find ourselves being very prideful and arrogant, but we need to humble ourselves and recognize God in heaven, and he is the ultimate authority. So it's a good read today. Tomorrow we're all in Psalms. We're going to read 4 different Psalms. We're going to read Psalm 74, 79, and 80, and then we're going to read Psalm 89. So read those 4 before you open up the video, so we can discuss this, talk about it, see if we can get along for some takeaway. And in the meantime, you guys be safe.